Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the week starting on Monday, September the 22nd, 2025. It's going to be a very short video. I'm going to start off with a preview of the positions of the planets and the aspects they make, over the course of a week. And I'm not going to go into any great detail because in my daily videos over the next week, I'll be getting into all of these sort of specific events that are going to be happening. Some of them could be major, others are not quite so important. And having done my preview, I'm going to do an I Ching for the week. And this I Ching, I must always emphasize, is voluntary. It only applies to those who actually watch the I Ching section of this video. But if you do watch the I Ching section, you'll see that it's got sort of four subsections: general, then money, then career, and then relationships. So let's start off with the astrology. So here are the start positions. The positions of the planets at the beginning of the week, set for New York at midnight on Monday, September the 22nd. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. There is this sort of yin and yang symbol top right. I'm not sure whether that's such a good thing to have. It kind of looks a bit incongruous maybe. It's perhaps a reminder that I will be talking about the I Ching at a later stage. So turning to the positions of the planets, so here is the start position, and you can see midnight on Monday that the sun is at 29-25 degrees Virgo. So really getting ready to move into Libra. And in other words, sun moving into Libra, well, that is the autumnal equinox. Of course, I say it autumnal from a northern hemisphere perspective. In the southern hemisphere, it's the beginning of spring. And the equinox takes place, because it is a precise time. It's not just sort of some vague moment, or it's a precise time. And that will take place at 19 minutes past 7 in the evening London time. So if you're in the Americas, the equinox will take place on Monday, sort of maybe late morning, lunchtime, around then. If you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, then the equinox won't actually take place until tomorrow, it won't take place until Tuesday. The week really starts off with a big event. And while we have the equinox, at the same time, we have Mars moving into Scorpio. So again, Mars, right at the beginning of the week at midnight, is at sort of 29:53 Libra, very quickly, and sometime on Monday, Mars moves into Scorpio. Now that is quite a big change because, Mars in Libra is in its detriment. It's not a great sign for Mars. And, you think that, Mars is quite an assertive energy and it likes to do things its own way. But Libra perhaps is just a little too accommodating. And so Mars moving into Scorpio, suddenly Mars becomes very strong. Mars is in its own sign. And that could be too much of a good thing. I've got my Mars where's my Mars? At 0 degrees 50 Taurus. So next week I've got Mars opposition my Mars, and then I've got my ascendant at around 4 or 5 Taurus. So I'm going to have Mars on my descendant, so that could be troublesome. I'm a bit worried about next week because of Mars. Mars, though, we shouldn't exaggerate. Mars is relatively fast moving. It goes through all the signs on average about sort of once every 2 years, but still, it's a strong Mars, and that does perhaps mean that if we have been waiting to do something, we were looking for the right moment to take the initiative. Perhaps with Mars moving into Scorpio, we've just had the new moon, and we've got, of course, got the equinox. Starting. We move into a sort of a new season. So for many of us, it could be a big change, and I think part of it is because we've got the new moon, which took the new moon eclipse. The new moon eclipse was sort of on the 21st, and then right afterwards, we've got the equinox, and I think that this equinox is going to be important, and I think there are other ways of looking at it, and I think that we do have a huge amount of energy on that sort of 0 degrees Aries, 0 degrees Libra axis, and I'm thinking that this equinox, the equinox, is kind of going to be more of the same. We've just had the the new moon opposition Saturn, and the equinox picks up on it. And then Tuesday we've got the Sun moving on through Libra, and it makes an opposition to Neptune. So Sun opposition Neptune could create a few issues. Sun opposition Neptune can be about weakness, just not getting something together, feeling unsure of ourselves, not being able to see something through. Although Sun opposition Neptune, you could say it's about water damage, it's about chemicals, it's about toxins, it's about pollution. Although on a sort of positive note, Sun opposition Neptune can be quite a spiritual aspect, can allow us to transcend. But all things being equal, I would probably regard Sun opposition Neptune as being a negative. Then on Wednesday, Mars moving through Scorpio makes a square to Pluto. So Mars square Pluto, Mars in Scorpio, Pluto in Aquarius. That can be an aspect that is about power and how we assert ourselves, and some people feeling they absolutely want to be in control, other people feeling that it's difficult to hold their own because there are forces out there that are trying to perhaps sort of crush their individuality. So which side of the Mars square Pluto are you on? Are you the initiator, the aggressor even, or are you perhaps being threatened by Mars square Pluto? But it could be in your mind. Mars square Pluto might make us feel nervous and might make us wary of everything going on around us, and feeling that we're involved in a power struggle, and that it may be difficult to respond effectively. But maybe we need to just have another look at it and see how we can hold firm, see perhaps how we can take the initiative. So those events at the beginning of the week, Mars moving into Scorpio, the equinox, Sun opposition Neptune, Mars square Pluto, they all take place Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And really, that's the end of it. Those are the main events of the week. And the last half of the week, at least on paper, isn't so exciting. Though I should mention that between Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the moon is moving through the Via Combusta, that period, that part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio, which can be unstable. It can indicate that things don't necessarily go to plan. And that all sort of links in maybe with the fact that we've got Sun opposition Neptune. So we might think we've got everything sorted out, but not necessarily. And as we move to the end of the week, Friday we've got Sun quintile Jupiter. That's an aspect that perhaps allows us to make something happen. We can make a special effort to be positive. It's a quintile. It's kind of voluntary, but if we make an effort, we use our willpower, perhaps we can change things and change things for the better. Then Saturday we got Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus, and that aspect in itself is not necessarily so dramatic, but it just could represent sort of passing tension. Maybe there's something that we have to say. We feel that it must be expressed, and then the week ends with Mars biquintile Saturn, and Mars biquintile Saturn, it might be the kind of image that we are trying to present. Mars quintile Saturn is quite tough, and it perhaps regards life as being a struggle. Maybe we want to give the impression that life is a struggle, and we might almost deliberately try to make things more difficult than they actually are, or at least give that impression. And maybe we'll take the view that it suits our purposes. And that's really it. So there's not a huge amount happening at the end of the week. The activity in the week is really concentrated on the beginning. Now that doesn't mean to say that the last half of the week is going to be an anticlimax. There's nothing going to be happening, because you have to remember that I'm looking at it from a completely theoretical paper point of view. I'm just saying that the noteworthy aspects are on sort of Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So now it's time to switch to the I Ching, and do remember that if you don't want your I Ching read, you don't have to have it read. You can stop watching this video. My readings, only apply to those watching the I Ching section of this video. So this I Ching reading, as I always do, is going to have 4 parts. A general part, then I'm going to look at money, then career, and then finally relationships. So I asked the question, what is the week starting on Monday, September the 22nd, going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 13, fellowship with others. And this hexagram seems to be fairly innocuous. There are people to deal with. We don't even necessarily have to deal with them, at least on the surface. But it just does suggest that we shouldn't necessarily be seeing everything in terms of ourselves. There are people we might want to work with, and we may be very aware of our social ties, and so this perhaps connects with the sun moving into Libra. The sun in Libra traditionally is a very sociable placement for the sun, and Librans are interested in the power balance and how people relate to one another and what keeps people together, and they're very aware of how their words can change things. Some Librans do make a special effort to keep everyone happy. There are other Librans who are acutely aware of where the balance lies, and that perhaps gives them the ability to overthrow this balance. So, Librans could use their knowledge, in a different way. So that certainly sounds good, fellowship with others. But in practice, there could be a few problems. And, that relates to the fact that the second and the third line is moving. So the second line moving, there may be a degree of rivalry, different people competing with one another, and it might be a question of the in-group and out-group, making a comparison between your clan and another clan, and it's easy to form factions. Now that depends on your situation. Now if you are completely alone, absolutely alone, and you are a hermit, you are literally a hermit in your cave, it's probably not going to bother you. Well, unless you have a serious personality disorder, because we're talking about different factions, and normally if one's on one's own, one doesn't have to worry about competing factions, especially if one doesn't have access to the internet. But it's always difficult to completely isolate oneself from the world, and I think the factional side of things is going to be something that we're very aware of. In fact, even if we are on our own and we're just watching the news, this hexagram may say something about what we're seeing, and it's kind of more of the same. Factions are everywhere. There is a lot of hatred around us, and people can't get on. And if we're in a group situation, could be our friends, at work, other associations, political parties, perhaps, then it's going to be very, very quick that factions start to form, and people may turn against each other, within a single faction. And so I think it is potentially a dangerous situation. So even though the hexagram is called fellowship with others, the reality of the hexagram is almost the opposite. There are so many ways in which people can fall out, and then the third line moves. Of course, in I Ching, the third line is often unfortunate, and this third line can talk about mistrust. People don't trust each other, and people are perhaps trying to seize the advantage, or they're wondering how other people can take advantage of them. And given the fact that it is a complicated social situation, then it's probably best not to do anything. I mean, that is certainly a piece of advice here. You shouldn't feel that something has to be done, and it's probably better to allow the situation to settle. And this might reflect what's going on astrologically. It's not just that we've had the equinox at the beginning of a week. We've got Mars square Pluto at the beginning of a week, and you might say that this aspect, Mars square Pluto, does tie in with fellowship with others. Fellowship with others. Okay, the lines, the moving lines in fellowship with others. So much rivalry, conflict, mistrust, people trying to seize the advantage. You could say that this sums up Mars and Scorpio square Pluto in Aquarius very well. And so it's perhaps a case of the I Ching and the astrology reflecting the same thing, but perhaps using different words. And, I should say that this doesn't necessarily have anything specifically to do with our own life. It may instead be just about the world in which we're living, and when we watch other people's behavior. But if you are tempted to sort of get involved in anything of a social nature, I think you have to be careful. And that is reflected by the next hexagram, because with two moving lines, the second and third line moving, these two lines, the second and the third line, they switch positions, and so we get to the hexagram number 10, and so this is where fellowship with others develops too, and it's not such a bad hexagram treading, provided we are careful. And maybe treading says something about the last part of the week. So the first part of the week may be difficult. And when I looked at the astrology, I did point out that we've got some serious things going on. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Mars moving into Scorpio, the the equinox, Sun opposition Neptune, Mars square Pluto, and that might have said something about fellowship with others and how we try to negotiate the situation. And then treading, well, treading is about caution. And it's still about advance. We have to put a foot forward. And the problem we're facing with treading is that we don't want to step on the tiger's tail. And, we have the image here of a tiger lying down, apparently asleep, and we have to get past this obstacle. There's no way round a tiger. We can't just take a huge detour. There's only one route. The tiger's there. We have to get past it. And what we just must make absolutely sure that we do not tread on the tiger's tail. Because if we tread on the tiger's tail, the tiger's going to wake up, and we could be in real trouble. We could get bitten by the tiger. But the I Ching does indicate that we have what it takes. So it just indicates a delicate situation. And we already know it's delicate because other people are delicate. From a social view, things are complicated, and things could go wrong quickly. And there's a lot of rivalry and sort of hatred around us that we have to get past somehow. But I think we will get past it. So I do think that the first part of a week is probably going to be more difficult than the last part, perhaps because the first part we're in a difficult social situation, even if we're relatively alone, and it will sort of only start to improve towards the end of a week. But even then, we do have to be very careful. Now, turning to money, we have the hexagram fellowship with others. And so from a financial perspective, it might be very easy to get other people's advice, or there may be temptations here to link your finances with another person's finances, or to do something with other people that has implications for your money, your bank account, your bank balance. And when it comes to money, it might seem that everyone is on the same wavelength, that people have common goals. This is not true. I think it becomes clear that everyone has got their own financial interests, and they are trying to maximize it, quite possibly at your expense. And this applies, if you're dealing with an institution, a bank, whatever it is. There are always commissions that this institution is looking to gain or get or collect, and they're not necessarily thinking about you. So certainly at the beginning of a week, you've got to be very independent-minded with money, and you mustn't be tempted to do anything with other people with money. Again, it might seem that everyone is on the same wavelength, that your gain is everyone else's gain, but it's not true. There are going to be, winners and losers here, or there could be winners and losers, and I just don't think that you can trust anyone. And so just hold back. Maybe someone is pressurizing you to agree to something financially, maybe social pressure as well, but it's not worth it, certainly at the beginning of a week. Now, at the end of a week, maybe things are different, because we do move to a second hexagram, and that hexagram is number 10, treading. And so perhaps you can start to reach out to other people. Perhaps you can discuss money, discuss your money, they can discuss their money, but you still have to be very careful. This is not an easy situation financially, and you still need to recognize that everyone has their own interests, and their interest is not the same as your interest. But if you are careful, I think that you can get round the problem and maybe come to some kind of an agreement, but it's got to be an agreement that takes place in a situation where you have your eyes wide open. And then there is career and business, and it's a similar picture. Fellowship with others. It seems that you can't really make progress without other people. That might be how it seems. That you want to enjoy their company, and not just enjoy their company, but you also want to perhaps benefit from cooperation. One thinks of teamwork. That sort of happens in the world of work. Of course, if you're sort of self-employed and sort of isolated like me, perhaps I don't really appreciate how it all pans out. But apparently, teamwork, getting on with other people, getting on with your workmates, is important. And you might feel that you have to join with others for some sort of common purpose, and seems obvious, but it's not necessarily going to work out as expected. And if you are working with other people, it won't take much for people to sort of divide up into factions. People will have their own interests, and it's not going to be a cooperative environment. It seems as if it's going to be a cooperative environment. Why not? Everyone should be working towards the common good, but no, it's not going to work out at all. And you're just going to have to deal with just people being annoying, perhaps being so selfish, maybe self-destructively selfish, but still people's selfishness is just going to spoil things. And from a business perspective, if you have your own business, then cooperation with others might seem a good idea. Trusting people, I wouldn't recommend it at the beginning of a week, certainly, because again, everyone has their own interests, and people in pursuit of their own interests may be very destructive. They may be self-destructive, and they certainly could be destructive as far as your own aims are concerned. So best to avoid other people, I would have said, and to be as self-sufficient as possible at work. And if there is a situation where you do have to work with other people, well, you have to be careful, and that leads to the second hexagram, the treading. So perhaps by midweek, things will start to get a bit better, and maybe there is the capacity for cooperating with other people, but you've got to still be very careful. Things could go wrong. You are getting very close to the tiger. You do not want to tread on the tiger's tail. And so maybe it's just a question of getting through the week without being taken advantage of. And I think you need to be as self-sufficient as possible when it comes to your work and your career, because if you involve yourself with other people, or if there are concepts of partnerships, if you're planning on partnering with someone, or perhaps some joint venture, it could go wrong. And the reason is self-interest. And that could be an underlying problem of the week, especially at the beginning of a week. And finally, there's relationships. Well, fellowship with others as a hexagram is a very relationship hexagram. That's what it's all about. It's about how you get on with people. And on the surface, fellowship with others suggests that you can get on with people fine. Relationships are going to be important. Whatever the relationship is about, you might feel that that is the best way to make the most of everything going on, and that's perhaps not surprising, given at the beginning of a week we've got the equinox and the sun moves into Libra, and so we're encouraged to think beyond ourselves and our own selfish interests and to link up with people, for whatever reason. There may be some concrete purpose. Of course, it might just be a question of wanting company, wanting to be involved with someone. And if you're in any kind of relationship, for example, a marriage, that might also be important to you. Finding common interest with someone, perhaps with someone who you have maybe hadn't got on with so well in the past, but you want to be with people, you want fellowship. And this fellowship with others is probably more talking about the group rather than one-to-one relationships, but this last section does cover one-to-one relationships. So I think that with fellowship with others, you are looking for connections here, but you might be looking in vain because of those two moving lines. Even in a one-to-one relationship, there are selfish interests. I mean, you have your selfish interests. What do you want from the other person? How can you benefit? How perhaps can you maximize your power? Remembering that, at the beginning of a week, or sort of midweek, we've got Mars square Pluto. That is a very power-orientated aspect. And so you might want to really leverage your power. Or perhaps it works the other way. Perhaps another person is trying to assert control over you. And this doesn't seem the right thing to do. It's not a good foundation for for any relationship. So I'm thinking that from a relationship view, certainly the first half of the week, relationship should probably be de-emphasized, because interests might converge and there might be a power struggle. And so perhaps you just need to accept the situation. It's only a few days. Now, by the end of a week, things are starting to improve, because fellowship with others does morph into hexagram number 10, which is treading. So in your various relationships in the last half of the week, you can perhaps be more positive, and you can sort of send out feelers, and you can make more of an effort to get on with one particular person. But you still have to be very careful. You're not out of the woods. But if you are careful, and you don't have any missteps, you're not too trusting, at the same time you're not too bold. I mean, that's the problem with treading. If you're too bold, you don't think before you step. There's a danger that you step on the tiger's tail, and then you've got trouble. But I think that by the end of a week, the relationship situation should be improving, and perhaps you can be more forthcoming. And that's it. That's all I've got to say. Overall, I think that this week could be sort of more difficult at the beginning. Maybe from sort of Thursday onwards, things are going to become sort of more straightforward. But I hope you enjoy the week and you make the most of the equinox. And if you happen to enjoy the video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.